I'm Tom Anichini, Chief Investment Strategist at GuidedChoice. I'm a CFA charter holder and a CFP certificate, and this is Trekking Through Retirement. I'm going to talk about tax strategies pertaining to retirement. Let me start with an anecdote about someone I know whose wealth advisor had retired, and he had a new wealth advisor. This person's a retiree, and with his new wealth advisor, he got check writing capabilities with his retirement accounts. Chances are he already had those with the previous advisor, but the previous advisor didn't let him know that. In any event, as a lot of retirees do, he withdrew his required minimum withdrawal at the beginning of the year. Later in the year, he had a large expense, and without really thinking or consulting his advisor, he wrote a check for that expense drawn on his retirement assets. And what he did not realize was the tax implications of writing that check. So what I'm going to discuss over the next few minutes are tax strategies and mistakes to avoid. I'm going to start by talking about tax implications of different sources of income and wealth. A retiree might have Social Security retirement income, which is not untaxed. It is partly untaxed, and depending on how much income you have, more of it might be taxed. There's actually a story in today's New York Times about Social Security retirees being surprised that their Social Security benefits were taxed. Also, retirees might have a defined benefit pension that's taxed as ordinary income. They might have annuity payments, some or all of which might be taxed depending on how it was purchased. They might have part-time work, which is taxable as ordinary income. And they have retirement plan withdrawals, which is taxable as ordinary income. Similarly, retirees might have assets they're withdrawing from a taxable account and realizing taxable gains and losses. And those can have different tax effects. In addition to federal income taxes, there are also state taxes, and obviously a retiree needs to be cognizant of all of these. Let's start by generalizing about some tax minimization strategies that retirees might be able to make use of. One is called asset location, not asset allocation, which has to do with how much of your wealth should you invest in stocks and bonds and the like, but rather where should you locate stocks and bonds and the like. And when this becomes an issue is when you have a significant enough balance in both tax-deferred accounts, where you're not taxed until you withdraw, and taxable accounts, where you might be liable to pay ordinary income taxes and capital gains taxes and so on year to year. Tax location refers to the general strategy of putting your income-producing assets in the tax-deferred portion. Since interest and dividends would be taxable anyway, when you withdraw, you would pay ordinary income taxes on those. But if you were to hold those in a brokerage account, you would be paying income taxes on them. But you could have used that allocation space in the taxable account on stock investments or stock funds that just grew, possibly without paying dividends or interest that you wouldn't have to pay taxes on until you actually realized a gain. The other general strategy is called tax loss harvesting. Tax loss harvesting is the practice of realizing losses on taxable holdings by selling them. And the losses you realize can be used to offset taxable gains on other assets that you sell at a gain. Also, even if you don't have any taxable gains, taxable losses can be applied up to $3,000 against ordinary income. Check with your tax advisor. This video is not meant to constitute tax advice, but that's the general idea behind tax loss harvesting. Okay, now let's talk about some tax-efficient withdrawal strategies. And along with that, I'm also going to talk about tax-efficient contribution strategies. However, I'm going to start by talking about the IRS and the Treasury from a policy perspective. And I want you to think about what their mindset is as they tax different buckets of assets. The way I see policy and rules about what gets taxed when, what I interpret is that they're more or less indifferent about taxing you now versus taxing you later, as long as they get the taxes eventually. And as a result, they afford you some flexibility. And that offers you an opportunity to pay less in taxes with a little bit of strategizing. So let's talk first about contributions. When you're in the accumulation phase, of course you could make contributions in a traditional plan or an IRA. You're not taxed on those contributions, but you understand you will be when you make withdrawals. Alternatively, you might choose to make Roth contributions. You're contributing after-tax money, but you're not taxed down the road on the growth or the withdrawal. Depending on your situation, it might make sense to have more of one than the other, but we're going to come back to that. You might also have capital gains, short-term gains, long-term gains in a brokerage account. You might have the opportunity to contribute to a health savings account, an HSA. Those are called triple taxed advantaged because that's the one exception to what I said is the policy. And it seems to be they don't mind possibly never taxing HSA money at all. So you can make contributions that aren't taxed. You can allow it to grow like a retirement account and the earnings aren't taxed. And then when you make withdrawals, as long as they're for qualified medical expenses, those aren't taxed either. So those are very valuable. And when someone has all these choices available to them, I encourage them to consider maxing out on their HSA first and investing that as they would a retirement account. Now, in the decumulation phase, when you're a retiree, you're not making contributions anymore, but now you're subject to withdrawals, mandatory withdrawals. So even if you don't need them, again, from the policy perspective, the IRS wants the taxes eventually, and the way they get them is they require people to withdraw a minimum amount of their retirement assets every year. No longer Roth assets, but definitely any 401k or IRA assets. They're going to require that a certain percentage be withdrawn every year. And that percentage depends on your age. The start age for the required minimum distribution, or RMD, that's in flux. It used to be the RMD age was age 70 and a half. Then there was legislation to push that back to 72. And now there's legislation to push it back to 73 and eventually 74 and 75. And you might think that's great. I'll allow my retirement assets to grow and grow and grow, and I don't have to pay taxes on them yet or make withdrawals yet. And that's true. However, let me tell you a few reasons why it might make sense to withdraw some of those monies now, even if you don't need them, and that is to reduce the potential tax down the road. So one reason why the potential tax down the road might be big is because the account's big and you're earning enough from your other sources that you'll be in a high ordinary income tax bracket. Another reason is if you're a couple, you're used to filing jointly. So you're paying the same income tax rate on a higher marginal bucket of money. But if one of you passes, after a year, the other one will be filing single. and now they're going to be paying taxes on smaller buckets of money. So if they still have those big retirement pools of assets out there, their RMDs are going to be very expensive in terms of taxes. So it might make sense to withdraw some of those monies early. Also, it might make sense to convert some of that money to Roth. If you're going through a period of time before you're required to take your RMDs and maybe your income isn't all that high, you could work with a tax advisor to strategically take withdrawals from your retirement accounts, traditional accounts, pay taxes on them, designate them as Roth assets. And then they can continue to grow as Roth assets. And then when you withdraw them down the road, they won't be taxed. Let me talk some more about some tax-efficient contribution strategies. And the main idea is give yourself options. If you're very young, very early in your career, or if you're just in a trough where you're just not earning that much this year, best to save any retirement money in a Roth account. Yes, you'll be paying taxes on it, but that will be at a presumably much lower tax rate than you'll be enjoying or have to pay later in life. So better to pay the taxes now and get those out of the way so you don't have to pay them at a higher marginal rate down the road. Once you're past that early low pay period in your career, it's probably best to contribute to a combination of traditional and Roth. And the reason is you don't know what's going to happen. And so this way you can leave yourself options down the road. By all means, consult with a tax advisor. Nothing I'm giving in this video should be construed as tax advice, but it's good to have options. Do your homework. Understand your state taxes. Understand estate taxes, and understand how estate taxes can affect IRAs and taxable accounts. And let's say someone wants to leave an IRA and a brokerage account holding appreciated stock. They're worth the same amount of money. And the person has two heirs in mind. One is someone right out of college barely making any money, and the other is a middle-aged couple making plenty of money. In general, you would think the person would rather give the IRA to the college student because the college student will be required to take minimum distributions and be taxed on them. But the college student is paying at a very low marginal rate. Whereas the middle-aged couple, as soon as they get that brokerage account, there's what's called a step up in basis. So now if they sold the whole thing, there'd be no gain to realize and they wouldn't owe any taxes on it. If they did the reverse, sure, the young person could do the same and sell the taxable asset, pay no capital gains tax, but the middle-aged couple now who's already in a higher marginal rate, now they're taking RMDs, so they're going to be paying a very high marginal rate on that inheritance. So between the two, there seems to be a less taxing mix by giving the higher taxed asset to the lower income heir and the lower taxed asset to the higher income heir. Something else to consider is healthcare costs. Out-of-pocket healthcare costs can be tax deductible, but only above a threshold of adjusted gross income. So make sure you understand that. If you do have to pay very high out-of-pocket costs, make sure that your tax advisor is aware of that. A final consideration is changing tax laws. In 2017 was passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That changed a lot of income tax brackets and also gift and estate tax laws. Some of those changes are scheduled to revert unless there's legislation passed to keep them permanent or change them to something else. So understand that whatever might be optimal this year might not be optimal next year. So don't ever think that if you have a tax plan that it's going to be etched in stone, because you might have to revise it down the road. So do your homework. Takeaways. Young people, contribute to Roth accounts if you can. If you're not a young person but you know young people, encourage them to save in Roth accounts. If you're past that early low pay part of your career, consider a mix of contributions to traditional and Roth accounts. If you're eligible for contributing to an HSA, consider maxing out on that. Even if you can't max out on your other accounts, max out in your HSA, especially if you have a match. For taxable accounts, so if you have brokerage accounts, consider seeking the advice of a fee-only financial planner or a tax planner, and keep abreast of tax changes.